What if everything you've ever been told about being too much is actually a sign of something truly extraordinary? Stay with me, because by the end of this video, you'll come to understand why Carl Jung believed that the very traits society often criticizes could actually be the key to unlocking your deepest purpose. Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But what if who you truly are doesn't fit the mold that society expects? What if your intensity, your sensitivity, and your refusal to accept shallow or surface-level answers aren't flaws that need fixing, but instead are signs of a rare and powerful psychological type? If you've ever felt like an outsider in your own life, or if people have labeled you as too deep or too complicated, then this is no coincidence. According to Carl Jung's groundbreaking research into personality types, some individuals possess what he called differentiated consciousness, a way of experiencing reality that most people never develop. Here's something fascinating. Jung discovered that these rare personalities often spend their entire lives thinking something is wrong with them, but in reality, they are operating at a level of psychological sophistication that is genuinely uncommon. However, there is a catch, and I will reveal what it is in just a moment. Today, we are going to explore 8 unmistakable signs that you might possess this rare personality type. If you recognize yourself in these patterns, it will not only change the way you see your past, but it might revolutionize your entire future. But first, let me ask you something. Have you ever noticed that your emotional reactions seem disproportionate compared to what others experience? There is a psychological reason for this, one that Jung uncovered, and it's not what you might think. Sign 1. You experience emotional depth that others simply cannot comprehend. Carl Jung discovered something remarkable about emotional intensity. He found that certain individuals don't just feel emotions. They experience what he called affect tone, complexes that create profound psychological resonance. Simply put, you don't just have feelings. Feelings move through you like powerful ocean currents, deep and transformative. Here's what Jung realized that most people miss. This isn't emotional instability. It's emotional sophistication. But why does society try to convince you otherwise? When you feel deeply, you are not overreacting. You are accessing layers of psychological experience that most people have learned to suppress. Jung said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." Your emotional intensity is not a burden. It is a form of psychological radar that detects what others cannot see. You feel the unspoken tensions in rooms. You sense when someone's smile doesn't match their eyes. You carry the emotional undercurrents of every interaction because your psyche is wired for depth, not for surface-level pleasantries. But here's where it gets interesting, and where most people with this trait make a critical mistake that keeps them stuck. Jung identified a specific pattern in how emotionally deep people sabotage their own gift. The world tells you to tone it down, to be more reasonable, to stop making everything so dramatic. But Jung understood that when you suppress this emotional depth, you don't become normal. Instead, you become neurotic. You start experiencing what he called psychological splitting, where one part of you knows the truth, while another part tries to conform. This is why you have probably felt exhausted trying to be someone you're not. But what if I told you that Jung discovered a way to transform this overwhelming emotional intensity from being a burden into becoming your greatest strength? I will share that technique with you in sign number 6. Sign 2. You question everything with relentless curiosity. According to Carl Jung, most people live what he called unconscious lives. They accept social programming without ever examining it. But you, you cannot help but dig deeper. Jung would recognize you as someone who has an active thinking function that refuses to accept surface-level explanations. Here's what is crucial. Jung discovered that people who question everything are not being difficult. They are simply being psychologically honest. However, there is a hidden cost to this honesty, one that most people don't realize until it is too late. You don't just ask what. You ask why. Why do people remain in relationships that make them miserable? Why do we accept systems that don't serve us? Why do we pretend that shallow conversations represent meaningful connection? Your mind is constantly seeking the truth beneath appearances. Jung called this the transcendent function, the psychological ability to see beyond current limitations. While others accept the status quo, you are already envisioning what could be different, what could be better, and what could be more authentic. But here is the paradox that Jung identified. The clearer you see, the more isolated you may become. Why? Because your questions threaten other people's comfortable illusions. When you ask deep questions, you are not just seeking answers. You are challenging the psychological defenses that keep people feeling safe within their limitations. This is why you have probably been called cynical or negative when, in fact, you are being courageously honest. Jung discovered something fascinating about people like you. You possess what he called prophetic consciousness. You see where things are heading before others do. This gift comes with a responsibility that I will reveal in the final sign, and it may surprise you. Sign 3. You have developed fierce independence as a means of psychological survival. Carl Jung said, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. You have learned to do exactly this, not by choice, but by necessity." According to Jung's research, people with rare personalities often develop what he called individuated consciousness earlier than most, usually through adversity. Here is something Jung understood that most therapists miss. Your independence is not a defensive mechanism. It is an achievement. But society will try to convince you that it is a problem. And here is why that is dangerous. You have learned through painful experience that depending on others for your sense of worth is psychological quicksand. So you built yourself, you stood up, often alone, and created an identity that could not be taken away by someone else's opinion or absence. Jung called this process individuation, the psychological journey toward becoming whole. Most people never complete this journey because it requires facing what Jung termed the shadow, all the parts of yourself you have been taught to reject. But here is where it becomes complex. Your independence attracts people who want to possess it, and repels those who feel threatened by it. Jung identified a specific pattern in how independent personalities navigate relationships. Understanding this pattern changes everything. You do not need someone to complete you because you have already done the psychological work of becoming complete. This means you don't seek relationships out of desperation. You seek them out of choice. You don't want someone to save you. You want someone to stand beside you as you both continue growing. Jung discovered something profound about people who achieve true independence. They become magnets for both authentic love and manipulative control. The key is knowing the difference. And I will show you Jung's method for identifying this in sign number 7. Your solitude is not loneliness. It is sanctuary. It is where you remember who you truly are beneath all the roles and expectations and that self-knowledge. Jung said it is the foundation of all psychological health. Sign 4. You possess intuitive awareness that borders on psychic. Carl Jung revolutionized psychology when he identified intuition as a legitimate psychological function. He said, "Intuition is perception by the unconscious that brings forth ideas, images, possibilities, and ways out of a blocked situation by a process that is mostly unconscious." Here is what Jung discovered that science is only now beginning to prove. Some people's nervous systems are wired to pick up information that others miss entirely. But this gift comes with a burden that can destroy relationships if you do not understand how to manage it. You do not just observe people, you read their psychological state. He noticed the micro-expressions, the shifts in energy, the words they don't say. Jung would have recognized this as evidence of what he called active imagination, the ability to perceive beyond the obvious. When someone tells you they're fine, but their body language clearly screams distress, you can't unsee it. When there is tension in a room that everyone else seems to ignore, you feel it deep in your bones. This is not paranoia. It is psychological sensitivity operating at a very high level. But here is Jung's warning. If you don't learn how to protect this sensitivity, it will exhaust you completely. He identified a specific technique that allows highly intuitive people to maintain their awareness without absorbing all the psychological chaos around them. According to Jung, people with strong intuitive function often become unconscious therapists. They end up doing emotional labor for everyone around them. You regulate conversations, diffuse tension, and carry unspoken pain simply because you cannot help but perceive it. Jung made a startling discovery about intuitive personalities. They often lose themselves in the process of understanding others. There is a specific psychological trap that ensnares almost everyone with this trait, and recognizing it is absolutely crucial for your well-being. The danger is that you become so skilled at reading others that you forget to check in with yourself. You become externally focused, constantly scanning for emotional data while your own needs go unmet and remain unexpressed. But when Jung worked with highly intuitive individuals, he found they could transform this sensitivity from being a burden into a true superpower. The secret lies in understanding what he called psychological boundaries. And I will reveal this technique to you in just a moment. Sign 5. You crave meaning over social acceptance. Carl Jung observed, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. But what if being true to yourself means rejecting everything society tells you to want?" Jung discovered that certain personalities are psychologically incapable of living inauthentic lives. Here is what Jung realized about people like you. You don't choose meaning over popularity. Your psyche demands it. But this creates a specific type of psychological conflict that can be devastating if you don't understand what is happening. You probably tried living for external validation. Maybe you followed the script, said the right things, played the expected role. But Jung would have recognized the symptoms immediately. That gnawing emptiness, that sense of betraying something essential, that quiet desperation beneath the applause. According to Jung, when you live against your psychological type, you don't just feel uncomfortable, you develop what he called neurotic symptoms. Your psyche literally rebels against inauthenticity. Jung made a disturbing discovery. Most people never experience genuine meaning because they are too afraid of social rejection. But people like you face a different challenge, one that is both harder and more rewarding. You cannot pretend that shallow goals matter. You cannot get excited about achievements that lack substance. You cannot build relationships based on convenience rather than connection. Your psychological makeup will not allow it. This is why you have probably felt like an alien in your own culture. But Jung identified something remarkable about people who prioritize meaning. They become evolutionary catalysts for human consciousness. When you refuse to settle for less than authentic connection, you force others to confront their own inauthenticity. When you ask the questions others avoid, you create space for truth. When you live according to your values rather than your fears, you give others permission to do the same. But here is Jung's most important insight about meaning-driven personalities. You have a psychological responsibility that goes beyond personal fulfillment. I will reveal what that responsibility is in the final sign, and it might change how you see your entire life purpose. Sign 6. You have outgrown people and environments that once fit. Carl Jung said the greatest tragedy of the family is the unlived lives of the parents. But what happens when you refuse to live an unlived life? What happens when you grow beyond the psychological limitations of your environment? Jung discovered something profound about psychological growth. It is often a solitary journey. But there is a specific type of grief that comes with evolution. And understanding this grief is crucial for your continued development. You have likely experienced the painful realization that the people who once knew you do not anymore, not because you have become difficult or superior, but because you have shed layers of conditioning that no longer serve you. Jung called this process psychological death and rebirth. Here is what most people do not understand about outgrowing relationships. It is not a choice you make. It is a consequence of becoming authentic. But Jung identified a way to navigate this transition that honors both your growth and your past connections. The friends who knew you when you were shrinking, when you were people-pleasing, when you were suppressing your truth, they remember that version of you. And sometimes they want that version back because it felt safer, more predictable, and easier to understand. But you cannot go back. Jung understood that psychological evolution is irreversible. Once you have seen behind the curtain of social conditioning, and once you have tasted authentic living, you cannot return to unconscious conformity. Jung made a startling observation about people who outgrow their environments. They often undergo what he called the dark night of the soul, a profound period of loneliness that tests their commitment to authenticity. This is not ordinary loneliness. It is existential isolation. The recognition that your path is unique, your perspective rare, and that your growth may require leaving behind everything familiar. But Jung also discovered something beautiful about those who successfully navigate this transition. They attract relationships of extraordinary depth and authenticity. The key lies in understanding his concept of psychological resonance, how authentic people find each other. When you stop performing and start simply being, when you stop shrinking and begin expanding, when you stop apologizing for your depth and instead start owning it, something profound shifts in your entire relational field. Sign 7. You offer profound presence in a distracted world. According to Carl Jung, the meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. But what if you are the type of person who creates transformation simply by showing up authentically? Jung identified a rare quality. Some people possess the ability to create what he called psychological holding space. If you have this gift, you already know how much it costs you, though you may not realize how rare and valuable it truly is. When someone speaks to you, they feel seen in a way that is uncommon. You don't just listen to their words. You perceive their underlying emotional state. You don't offer quick fixes. You offer deep witnessing. You don't rush to judgment. You create space for truth to emerge. Jung understood that this level of presence is actually a form of psychological healing. In your company, People remember what it feels like to be human, complex, contradictory, and worthy of understanding. But here is Jung's crucial insight. People with this gift often exhaust themselves by giving it too freely. He identified specific psychological boundaries that allow empathetic people to maintain their depth without depleting themselves. You have probably found yourself in the role of unofficial therapist, emotional anchor, or safe harbor for others. While this makes you invaluable, it can also make you invisible. You become so skilled at holding space for others that you forget to ask for space to be held yourself. Jung discovered something important about highly empathetic personalities. They often develop what he called helper syndrome, a pattern of unconscious self-sacrifice that ultimately serves no one. The work is not to stop caring or to close your heart. The work is to learn discernment to understand who deserves access to your emotional presence and who has earned the right to reciprocate. When Jung worked with people who possessed natural therapeutic presence, he found they needed to learn a specific skill that transformed their relationships entirely. I will share this skill in the final sign because it is the key to maintaining your gifts without losing yourself. Sign 8. You sense a larger purpose that you cannot yet define. Carl Jung said, "Your vision becomes clear when you look into your heart. Who looks outside? Dreams. Who looks inside? Awakens." If you have felt a persistent sense that you are meant for something more than the ordinary, Jung would have recognized this as what he called the transcendent function, your psyche's drive toward individuation and purpose. Here is what Jung discovered about people with an undefined but urgent purpose. They are not delusional or grandiose. They are responding to what he called archetypal calling. But there is a specific way this calling can become distorted. And understanding this is crucial. You have felt it, that restless knowing that you have something to contribute, something to build, something to say. It may not be clear yet, but it is undeniable. Jung understood this as evidence of what he called creative potential-seeking expression. This is not about fame or recognition. It is about alignment, the psychological necessity of living in harmony with your deepest nature. Jung found that people who ignore this calling often develop what he termed neurotic symptoms, anxiety, depression, and a sense of meaninglessness. But here is Jung's most profound insight about purpose-driven personalities. Your calling is not just personal, it is transpersonal. You are not here just to fulfill yourself. You are here to serve the evolution of consciousness itself. Jung believed that individuals with rare personalities serve as bridges between the unconscious and conscious realms of human experience. Through your depth, your questions, and your refusal to accept shallow answers, you help humanity grow. This is why you cannot settle for the ordinary. This is why surface-level connections feel empty. This is why you would rather be alone than pretend. Your psyche knows you have work to do, and that work requires authenticity, depth, and courage. But Jung also warned about the inflation that can come with recognizing your purpose. The key is holding both humility and power, understanding that you are special without believing you are superior. Carl Jung spent his entire career studying personalities like yours. He called people with these traits the differentiated individuals, those who have developed psychological complexity that allows them to see, feel, and understand at levels most people never reach. If even half of these signs resonated with you, you are not just different. You are part of what Jung called the leading edge of human consciousness. You are one of the people pushing our species toward greater awareness, deeper truth, and more authentic connection. Yes, it is lonely sometimes. Yes, it is misunderstood. Yes, it requires more courage than most people will ever need. But Jung believed that people like you are essential for humanity's psychological evolution. Your sensitivity is not a weakness. It is a superpower. Your intensity is not too much. It is exactly what the world needs. Your refusal to settle is not difficult. It is brave. Carl Jung once said, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." You are learning to do exactly that, and in doing so, you are giving others permission to do the same. Drop a comment below and tell me which of these signs felt most true to you. Share this with someone who needs to remember their own psychological rarity, and subscribe to Carl Jung Women, because we are just beginning to explore the depths of what makes you extraordinary. Remember, you're not too much. The world is too little. And Jung knew that people like you are the ones who change that.